I understand that coffee break attraction is relevant anyhow, but we are determined to go ahead. We had our coffee, all of us, and we are ready to start this session. Thank you, Eptesan, for having us here. It's a pleasure. And on this session on Indo-Pacific and India, I will start with two very brief statements. The Indo-Pacific has clearly become one of the new fulcrum of global geopolitics, with India clearly and increasingly becoming the new fulcrum of the Indo-Pacific. With the help of this extraordinary panel of friends, we will try to answer one crucial question. Is India ready, willing, capable to make the big leap into international stage at economic, political, and diplomatic level, or may internal, external challenges slow down or jeopardize this trajectory? And we will start with Samir Saran, the president of ORF and a friend. Samir, I start with you and end up with you after the other intervention. Because you are, to our knowledge, one of the most effective ambassadors of India as a fulcrum of international politics, and you will inevitably be the fulcrum of our session. I mean, I don't ask you whether India is willing to become the center. It's obvious. I'm asking you whether you believe India is capable and ready to take that role. And I'm asking this question since I've been around for a while. I'm now an old Italian gentleman. And we have been these dreams of important role. You may not remind that, but in the 50s, Italy was the emerging country in Europe. Great growth, incredible stability, monetary stability. And then we had Japan, which was for 20 years the country of the future. And then I'm familiar with Latin America, and Brazil was the country of the future. And Brazilians say it's the country of the future and it will always be. And then even China, which for the last 20 years is the country of the future, has now some problem. So when talking about India and the golden age of India, as James put in this book, are you concerned a little bit first, and are you more concerned by internal or external challenges to this trajectory?
Look, I don't think that was James' book, and I don't agree with James' book. But that's not what he was also implying. He called it the Gilded Age of India, not the Golden Age of India. His book was a takedown on what was happening in India in terms of its economic models. It was not a book that was supportive of India's transition, or even recognizing it in the manner in which you want me to address it. I think it was a different book with a different context. And we have a different...
but I just took the golden. The golden gave the impression of this incredible India. You know, there was a campaign on incredible India 10 years ago. Now it's incredible India.
No, but I'm glad you said that, because James is a dear friend and has been in the think tank sector, has been organizing big events like these, has brought together diverse opinions. And we must recognize first at the outset that there is no single view on India from outside India and from even within India. We must recognize this. And that is true. That is a truism. Let's start with that. 1.4 billion Indians have their own idea of the country, and they change their mind every day. So we have multiple conversations happening on where we are. But I can certainly give you 3 points to think about. We don't want to be the perpetual bridesmaid like Italy. We don't even want to be the single most important influencer in the region. But as the pieces are falling, it is becoming quite clear that even as we sit today, India is contributing 15% of all global growth. With less than 5% of share in global GDP, it is punching 3 times above its weight in terms of contributing to economic progress for everyone. That's not something that's insignificant. It is a substantial new role India is seeing through its economic growth in the region. That's the first part. There is an economic engine that is working. Don't believe the Financial Times, don't believe the Economist. It is happening. It is not happening just in the big cities or in small pockets. It is happening across the sectors. Our sales of autos in rural India is phenomenal this year. The rebound to the economy is not K-shaped. It is, everyone is growing, some are growing faster. Our inequality is not Western inequality. It is just that the wealth creation at the top is significantly large, but the mobility at the bottom is transformational. So the problem of inequity comes when the wealth is created on the top and there is stagnation at the bottom. That's not happening. So again, Western grammar and vocabulary for describing India is a bad way of understanding India. All of India is rising. Millions are coming out of poverty. The participation of the young demographic is clearly something that is a force for good. That's the second point. The third point, the challenges. I think that's what you spoke about. With all these dynamic economic transformations, all of us have to ask the question, that is India, A, institutionally ready? That's one. That is our own investments into building institutions that can manage a $10 trillion economy in, say, 10 years' time. Are we ready to manage something as vast as that? Do we have the maturity of institutions? Do we have the wisdom in our various political segments? Do we have capabilities in our civil society and academia to make this growth sustainable? That's a fair question. And I truly believe that in the past, we were lethargic about our own transformations. In recent times, we are beginning to invest heavily in managing it. The challenge is, can we keep up? Or is our economy going to leave our domestic reforms behind? That's the first part of it. So I think there's a little bit of a challenge for us. Can we institutionally catch up with our economic and political transformations? The second challenge is what you referred to, which again I think is a Western narrative on India's internal cohesion, which is rubbish. We have seen in every crisis, in every foreign policy question, be it China, be it Canada, India has united and responded as one across political parties. We love to argue. We are the proverbial argumentative Indians. We'll disagree with you because you have taken a view. That's it. It is not fundamental. You don't know us. You wanted to civilize us. You colonized us. You wanted to modernize us. Listen, we are not you. We are us. We have our own way of creating consensus. We have our own way of building coalitions. And we will do it in our way. I'm sorry, I do not need a lecture on what is proper behavior or what is expected decorum in international relations or how we want to be talking amongst each other.
Okay.
So, internal cohesion, but listen, there is an external actor.
Okay.
Earlier, we could close our borders and live happily ever after. Today, we have, through technology, everyone participating in our personal and private spaces, whether it's a nation or whether it's an individual. And 2024, this year, that we are entering, will be the first year in the digital age when the two largest democracies and the two loudest democracies and the two craziest democracies, America and India, will choose their next leadership. So I think 2024 is an acid test for democracy and internal cohesion. And the results will be out in 6 months. You don't have to read newspaper articles. The exam will be, we are appearing for the examination, and in the middle of next year, we will know how democracies in different parts of the world are responding to this new moment where everyone on Twitter has a view, everyone on Twitter is polarized, everyone on Twitter is a radical, everyone on Twitter escapes from scrutiny simply because they can. And I think in a world where expression is weaponized, democracies are under threat all over. India is no exception. We have to see whether we have a society that is more resilient than the disruptions that external interference or technological interference offer us.
I had anticipated.
And this was a
is
short
one
answer to your very long
one
question.
of the best ambassador of incredible India, and that was proven in your eloquent answer and honest assessment, I would say, when you mentioned the institutional weakness that has to be addressed.
And the challenge to democracy.
Yes,
And our democracy is being challenged by everyone participating without context in our conversations. And it's happening everywhere. Authoritarian regimes can close down conversations. We have 8,000 people every morning who wake up in India and decide that today they want to protest about something that has happened. We are looking for outraging every day, right? And they've been doing that for the last 10, 15 years since the advent of the platform economy. So, you have to live with a very different age. And I think eventually people on the street are smarter than people who tweet. And that's what I believe about India.
At the beginning of love affairs, you tend to see the pitfalls or the limitation of your partner, but you are so in love. You may say, my partner is too big, my partner is too assertive, my partner has many lovers, but at the beginning of a love affair, you say, oh, this is so nice. And
are you talking about US and India?
Then when you get married after many years, all these little weaknesses become a reason to divorce. Now, if we get to the West and India, we now see these little problems. India is too big. You mentioned India is not cohesive, but are we do we have cohesion in Europe, for example, in our society? So India is too big. India is, in diplomatic term, a little bit easygoing, meaning, I use the Western vocabulary, multi-alignment. Is that the word?
Yeah.
So you go on well with US.
It's also called, in the 21st century, friends with benefits.
Oh, yes, yeah, that's a good point. And so, but these are seen now, but we are also fascinated by India partnering up with US for technology, with Japan and Europe for the markets, with China on changing the world, with on Russia on security. But won't this end up in a problem in the future? So let me put it in another term. Won't incredible India become not credible India in the future with this inconsistent relationship?
No, thank you. I think that's an important point. Someone asked me, last year, in fact, this year, India has really focused on the G20, building together a consensus, putting together a consensus that is ambitious. Some would argue that it has done that remarkably well. You could have, of course, some quibbles with the final recommendations, but I think in the moment that we were in, that was a very fairly ambitious delivery by the Indian presidency on the G20. And during that process, India centered on the global south and in many ways chose to first meet 125 countries and then in some ways take that agenda to the G20 to discuss and debate on. And many have asked me, is India the South? Is India more West? One of my colleagues told me categorically that, when someone asks you this question, be very precise and tell them we are Southwest. And I think that is where India is, that we have a large institutional arrangement that resembles many countries in the Western Hemisphere, and that's true, but we have a Southern ethic, and that confuses both of you. It confuses the South because we think like them, feel like them, talk like them, sing like them, dance like them, but our institutions are more like the West. And I think that is something which is an Indian proposition here that allows us to play the bridging role. And we have absolutely no doubts in our mind why we are there in the BRICS. We are there in the BRICS because we could do something good together with countries who are similarly placed in matters of development and growth. But we do not see ourselves being a part of the BRICS that is going to make it a political organization that is opposed to anyone or directed against anyone. And our being in the BRICS prevents it from doing that. In Quad, we are very clear we want to be there because we have to preserve the free and open spaces that allow trade and commerce that are essential for all of us. And we are partnering with like-minded countries. India has used the word inclusive every time it has spoken about Indo-Pacific, because it is not American ABC club, anybody but China club, right? It's not an ABC club. We are happy to work with all who want to keep the space fair, open,
We will
and free
get
for
to
all.
China soon, but thanks, Samir. Let me move to James. James, we already know that the golden age you mentioned in your book is not what we are talking about. There are different views, but let me ask you the same question I had for Samir. Is India willing, yes, ready and capable to take advantage of this incredible golden age, so to say?
So I think there's no doubt that India is becoming a much more prominent power both within its own region and globally. So in that respect, I agree with Samir. I mean, that's true economically at the moment, where India has regained its position as the world's fastest growing major economy. It's also true militarily, and you see it diplomatically. I mean, you saw it with the global focus on India's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You saw it in a successful G20, as Samir mentioned.
Can you hear him well? Can you be a little bit louder?
I see nods.
Now
okay.
better. Yeah.
I think I've been made even
Thanks,
louder.
James.
So I was saying you saw it in the successful G20. You see it every year at the Raisina Dialogue, which Samir hosts with great aplomb. Without reverting to stereotype, and you mentioned, I haven't heard the ABC phrase before, anyone but China. I mean, it seems to me that one piece of important context here that we need to put on the table, however, is the relationship between India and China. That one challenge, it seems to me, that India faces, and one that many Indian strategists are grappling with, is that while India is rising militarily and economically, China is rising from a higher base and more quickly. So because the Chinese economy is so big, even if it's growing at 3 or 4% and India is growing at 7%, the Chinese economy is still getting bigger. And Chinese military investment, despite what we heard in the last session from my friend Colonel Jobor, is rising very quickly. And so India has to manage the rise of its largest neighbor. And I think it's doing that in the way that any aspirant great power would do, which is partly through internal balancing, reforming its economy, growing more quickly, investing in its own military, but also external balancing. And so Samir is right that India has an omnidirectional foreign policy in which it's a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement and a member of the BRICS, and so it has a finger in many pies. But I suppose for this audience, I would point to 4 areas in which India has become, under Prime Minister Modi, a much more dynamic and entrepreneurial international partner. The first of those is with the United States, where the relationship between the United States and India, which has at times over the last 50 years been quite...
We will get to that in your second question on the United States.
Okay, all right. Well,
I get back to you in a while on that, but before we get to the United States, I would like to get the view on Indo-Pacific as a fulcrum and India as a fulcrum of the Indo-Pacific from our Chinese friend Hu and from our Indian but based in Abu Dhabi friend Janardhan. Hu, so we mentioned the increasingly relevant role of Indo-Pacific and the increasingly important role of India in Indo-Pacific. What's China's view of that?
I think this is for you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, India is rising, right? But for China, we think that India's rising is not in the framework of Indo-Pacific because it's not a correct framework. For us, this Indo-Pacific concept is not, created by India or served the Indians' interest. It's, initiated by Japan in 2007. And even this term hasn't been adopted by Obama administration. Only Trump in 2017 began to use this term to define a new framework to understand Asia, China, and India. So instead of rebalance to Asia, pivot to Asia, U.S. began to use the term of Indo-Pacific. But I think Biden administration began to materialize and upgrade, this concept into a mechanism, including a security one, Quad, consisting of U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. And also there are other minilateral arrangements, for security arrangements in Asia. So we believe that, this kind of security arrangements are targeting China. Also, in the economic dimension, we can see this, Indo-Pacific economic framework, which, was initiated last year, consisting of 14 countries, 7 Southeast Asian countries, India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, US. So it's totally for the competition against RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes China. So it means that on the economic dimension, on the security dimension, Indo-Pacific framework is used mainly by the US to isolate China and by reshaping Asia by building a new network of alliance. So in this regard, I think for India, it has to have a decisive idea on what's the future of Asia, what's the future of India's role. Is totally dependent on the US, or it could be more independent. So in this regard, China totally refused the whole concept of Indo-Pacific. We still divide Asia-Pacific from Indian Ocean, and for us, we think India is part of Asia, is a part of this Asia-Pacific cooperation. But we don't think Indo-Pacific is a good term. So in the phone call made by our foreign minister Wang Yi last year towards his counterpart in the U.S., he very clearly pointed out that Indo-Pacific concept has sent a wrong message to isolate China. So this is very important for us to understand this. So India's rising is not based on this Indo-Pacific framework. It's Chinese understanding. And also I think since my co-panelists mentioned that India is also a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well as BRICS. So China and India have many fields of cooperation. But also I think for India, based on this Indo-Pacific concept adopted by the US, is trying to enter the Middle East, including the Gulf region. Especially we have seen this I2U2 and also this newly initiated idea of the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor ideas. But all these ideas push India to be less balanced in this region. Okay. It's more cooperation with Israel. So we have seen that the Indians projects in the Haifa port has been actually influenced by the new situation after the October 7th, operation by Hamas. And also it means that more tensions with Iran.
You actually helped me introducing the next panelist.
Yes.
And thank you very much, because you are bringing us into what all this we are discussing is seen from here, and you mentioned that. Thank you very much. So, Janardhan, you were presented by Wu, in a sense. What's your take of this Indo-Pacific? I think Wu was clear enough in presenting China's view of that. What's the region's view of this Indo-Pacific and India role?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I should live up to Samir's expectations that Indians don't think alike or don't express their views alike. So let me give you a very different view from this part of the world. As an Indian who's been here for long enough, who understands the region a little better than many Indians and Westerners understand. And I don't blame you really in terms of the sort of differences that you have about India, because you don't understand us. Actually, we don't understand ourselves enough within India. So, let me flag 4 points for you. One, leading up to your actual question, because I think it's important to contextualize it with a little bit of background. One, I think there is no consensus on what the strategic interests of the Indo-Pacific strategy is among the 38 stakeholders that are involved, right? I mean, the diversity is a bit too much. So let's not even get into what those diversity elements are. Let's just say that there is no agreement on what Indo-Pacific strategy is overall, not even from Indian side. India basically, all the positive noise about India is not just about what it is today, but it's also about what it is expected to become in the next few decades. Samir said that it's already punching above its weight. It's likely to punch above its weight even more because, according to one of the former ministers, India has been called many things in the past. You know, a sleeping tiger, a lumbering elephant, and other exotic animals in the zoo. But now it is said to have gotten out of the zoo and is like a horse galloping on the racecourse. I think the next decade is really crucial for India's evolution. And so in this formulation that we've been discussing about, and you heard Dr. Anwar mention the other day, that geoeconomics is what is really governing geopolitics. So India's Indo-Pacific strategy should really focus on the economic dynamics and the non-traditional security dynamics rather than become too political or focus too much on the security dynamics. That's my take. And I think it is running the risk of becoming a political strategy, which is a drawback and it should be resisted. It is common sense that India's economic prosperity can be only achieved through stability. And as a result, India has cautiously pitched for what it's called SAGAR, S-A-G-A-R, which is security and growth for all in the region, which I think in a way is more suited to the Indian Ocean rather than all of the Indo-Pacific. Point number 3 is India's Indo-Pacific strategy should be to advance its interests and not that of the United States, in a sense, which is to counter China, because the US strategy is very clear. It is about countering China, and I don't think India has fallen into that trap, nor will it fall into that trap. India will never be America's poodle. Let's be very clear about it. So what we should be looking for is in terms of how all this links up with the region. I think that's really important. I think the region and India are finding synergies among growing superpower rivalry. The Indo-Pacific strategy fits India and the GCC relations very well. The Gulf region is very important for India. It fuels India's economic engines. It is home to more than 8.5 million people. We have nearly $100 billion worth of trade with the GCC countries. We have remittances of about $75 billion, all of this. So as long as the United States was the power that it was in the past, and the way it went about demonstrating its power in this part of the world, India and the Gulf region rode piggyback along with many other Asian countries on US naval presence in the region. But moving forward, I think we are beginning to see green shoots of new collective security. We are seeing a lot of engagement between India and the GCC countries in terms of naval exercises. This is also true of many other countries in the region which are having military exercises. And this basically feeds in, I think, you were talking about multi-alignment. Multi-alignment is not a very difficult word to understand. It is very easy to understand. And this part of the world is also looking at multi-alignment a great deal. And I think that is the starting point for both India and the GCC countries to look at multi-alignment. And in future, you will see India work with China. I know there is a lot of difference within India about what China is, but I think if this has to be 21st century has to be Asia's, there has to be some sort of an arrangement that India and China will come up with to work in the region. And America cannot take India for granted, and I think many in America are already beginning to sense it.
It's difficult to moderate 2 Indians in a panel. You know how difficult it is to get the
We are only 1.4 billion in the world.
Yes, but you are 50% of the panel.
We don't get enough chance to be heard.
No, but you were kindly enough to introduce my next question to James. James, Janardhan mentioned US and India relationship. He actually said it will never become a marriage, but it will stay a turbulent love affair, like Turkey. It won't become Japan, but Turkey. Would you agree on that in the long term?
I mean, it's hard to say what will happen in the long term. I think
medium.
I think it's probably fair to say that so let's start from now. The relationship between the United States and India taking into account the points that both Samir and Janardhan said, is unusually positive given its history. Both sides are very pleased with where it has reached. It has a number of different dimensions of its partnership, so a military dimension that previously never got anywhere is moving forward reasonably quickly. There has been a real focus on technological innovation, particularly with what's called ISET, the kind of bilateral deal that was struck last year, even some economic dimensions, and both sides are getting something out of this. So, as I said, I mean, I think principally India has decided to move closer to the United States and to some degree also the Europeans, because of China, not exclusively because of that, but that's been a large part of the thinking, which is in order to sort of cope with China, then we need some friends to balance with. That doesn't mean that the interests overlay exactly, so the clearest example is Taiwan. I mean, as Samir said, the United States is very focused on the Western Pacific and is investing a lot of energy in alliances and partnerships with sort of Taiwan in its heart. That's not really where India would focus its efforts. So I think the US doesn't expect India will ever become an ally. It is hopeful that India will become a closer partner, as it has over the last 5 years. And I think there's still quite a lot of mileage left to run. I mean, what will happen in 20 or 30 years as India moves from being a regional power with an aspiration to be a great power to becoming a great power itself, then it's very hard to tell. I mean, there certainly are scenarios, I think, in which the close relationship between the US and India could have more differences than it does today, but we'll just have to see.
Thank you, James. I'm European, and in Europe we have had a lot of big powers of the past. France, Germany, even Italy sometimes, Great Britain. And take France and Germany. They were competitors. They even went to war. But then eventually they started to cooperate in the framework of the European Union and are now the two, they run the show in Europe. What would you expect in the medium run considering India and China relationship? Cooperation in running Asia or stronger competition, even getting to something physical confrontation?
So we believe that China-Indian relations are decisive, for the future of Asia. And also China, always accept and welcome the role of India in Asia. Let's give you some examples. The RCEP, in the very beginning, India was part of this negotiation since 2012 until 2019. So it's India, quit from this negotiation because India believed that RCEP would strengthen Chinese influence in this, Asia-Pacific region. So it's not China refused India to be a part of that. It's India, have its own considerations and quit. Okay. And number two, I want to mention, this BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Definitely, India doesn't want to be a part of that. But AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, India think it can get, benefit from that and became a member of it, and get, I think, $4 billion loans from AIIB. And third example is that Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In 2017, China agreed that both India and Pakistan were accepted as full members of that organization. It means that China accepts the role of India in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia and East Asia. It's very clear. So I don't think, this, relations between Germany and France is similar to China-Indian relations, It's, how India understand, this Indo-Pacific concept of framework really, damage China-Indian relations. They don't need this framework. They could have these relations on the framework of Asia. It's enough. Yeah.
Thank you, Wu. My last question to Janardhan. Janardhan, Wu just mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative. And at the G20 in India, there was this important announcement of the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Okay, is how do you see this? Do you see this as a good example of the economic focus that you are expecting on Indo-Pacific, or will it turn eventually in a tool of competition, for example, with the Belt and Road, so increasing some kind of polarization in the region?
I think we should situate the India-Middle East Economic Corridor in the context of what I call 6 Cs that are in vogue in the world. Basically, it's, at least in this part of the world, it's more about capital, connectivity, commerce, collaboration, climate, and technology. You can call it cyber. So those are the 6 Cs, basically. And which I think both India and the Gulf are very interested in, and I think it's their agenda to pursue these 6 Cs as you move forward. And one that I think even the West is somehow becoming interested in. That's why I think most parts of Europe is also becoming part of it, because as long as the economies were doing well, values were more important than interests. Now interests are becoming more important than values to even many of the Western countries. And there's also a new word that I have become very interested in recent past, which is corridorization. I think we are increasingly beginning to see a lot of corridorization, and to a large extent, the Belt and Road Initiative has helped others also come up with new formats, and the IMAC is actually a design which is following that corridor logic. And corridorization is, I think, the most significant spatial manifestation of infrastructural capitalism and geoeconomics since the beginning of this century. Many people have asked if IMEC is a rival to BRI, and I think one can easily start comparing that with another comparison that was made, which is about whether I2U2 was, in a way trying to rival Quad. But I don't think so, because I think in both these there is more economic element than any political or security dynamic. And I think that's why we should designate these as partnerships of the future. Not trying to be prisoners of the past. So to a large extent, I think, again, another comparison would be if BRICS Plus is anti-US. No, I mean, the very fact that you see that the Gulf countries are with I2U2 and with BRICS suggests to you the concept that we were discussing, multi-alignment. And I think there is another very good word which we can discuss in terms of what this world is. It's a multiplex. It's a very, very complex world with multiple players out there. So in this sort of multiplex world, I think the answer to the question whether BRI is rivaling IMEC or IMEC is rivaling BRI is no. And even China has actually welcomed it, saying that even though it is not part of this corridor, as long as the projects are open, inclusive, and all about synergy, then it should not become a geopolitical tool, is what it is underlined. But otherwise, I don't think we should see these as rivals. The world is big. India has other corridor programs. The US has its own. Europe has its own now. So we're going to see more and more of these sort of connectivity projects as we move. And I'm sure you'll hear from our friend Mohammed Baroon next. He calls it a multi-networked world.
Thank you very much. We have been quite disciplined. So you have now, Samir, a couple of minutes for a few comments on what you heard, then we go to the floor.
Okay. So, just very few short comments first. I think on the big question on China, I think that James posed and, of course, our panelists also attended to. I think it is fair to say that India's single biggest foreign policy challenge, James, is going to be on how it shapes the next 10 years of its relationship with China. And I think the imperatives are clear. How can we develop political muscularity to ensure good Chinese behavior? At the same time, create economic institutional arrangements that allow us to grow together. And I think both of them have to happen at the same time. Tough on the borders, tough on your sovereign red lines, but very warm in exploiting economic opportunities that benefit all of us. And I think that's a golden median that you want, that we want, that West Asia wants, and that everyone wants. That how can we have good Chinese behavior and good Chinese economic relations at the same time? All of us are finding it difficult. That's the first observation. Second, coming to the panelists from China, I think if they are honest, if Chinese thinkers and speakers are honest, they will have to admit that China wants a multipolar world, but it wants a unipolar Asia. And that is the incompatibility. It wants to have a world which is shared by a few actors, but it wants to have Asia owned by it solely. It wants to be owner of the real estate of Asia. It allowed India into the SCO. It welcomed India into AIB. It's a very patriarchal view of Asia. And that, unless it changes, China has plateaued in its expansiveness. People are responding to it. We are not the only ones. James mentioned, the previous panel mentioned the maps released by their own neighbors. You are seeing pushback, and you are seeing de-risking, and you are seeing diversification of all Chinese partners, not because they don't like China, but they don't want to be only dependent on China. And I think that comes to the Middle East, the region itself. India and Middle East are each other's room to maneuver. We allow each other not to be pushed into any corner. American corner, Chinese corner, good corner, bad corner. We want to have our own pathways, and our partnership gives us that autonomy to choose what is good for our people, for our countries, and for ourselves. And in that sense, this new, the decadal, or maybe, Ambassador Suri is here, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, this importance of understanding each other's role in our own journeys is more clearly understood in capitals in this region than ever before. IMEC is not an anti-BRI project. It is a de-risking from BRI project. Let me put it this way, that you don't only have to depend on one game in town, you have multiple options and competitive opportunities to choose from. So is the case with some of the other connectivity projects that we're investing in. And let me end with the US because it was mentioned. I think none of us are appreciating the big changes that are taking place in Washington, D.C. to accommodate India in the journey ahead. America has never worked with a country that is bigger than it in population and that is possibly going to equal it in size in this century itself, or maybe in the next 3 decades. So America is having to readjust some of its own strategic thinking to accommodate India. Its media doesn't like India. Its intelligentsia doesn't like India. Its think tanks don't like India because they have never dealt with equals. They have dealt with always those who were smaller, who were meek, and who were submissive. This is a different relationship, one of its kind, and it is going strong. I believe we are the only country that has survived 4 different presidents and come out better every time. No other relationship in the world has done that.
That's true. That's true for sure. James asked to say one word, and then we go to the floor. One word.
Slightly more than one. Just very quickly. I mean, I thought that was very nicely put, that the challenge that Asia faces is that China wants a multipolar world, but a unipolar Asia. In addition to the relationship between the US and China, which India has to deal with, what you will see over the coming period is both India and China are sort of expanding into each other's territory, and that's the real challenge that has to be managed. So China is pursuing claims in the Himalayas and also expanding into the Indian Ocean, which India doesn't like. But India is also, it's developing relationships with Japan, with Australia, with Vietnam, with the Philippines, with Taiwan in a very sort of tentative way, and China doesn't like that either. And so, in a sense, as these two countries become larger and their sense of their own self-interest grows and their desire for strategic space becomes greater, it creates more tension. So I don't discount the idea that Samir puts on the table, which is just as we've seen over the last 6 months, an improvement in relations between the US and China. Certainly there is space for an improvement in relation between India and China, but those tensions are going to remain and in many ways are going to get worse over time as the two countries get bigger and more powerful.
Thank you very much.
Sorry,
Let me see what...
Sorry, I have to respond to this unipolar Asia idea.
So I'm sorry for the floor, but I have no question from the floor so far, so I can easily continue. Yes, Boo.
Give me 1 minute.
Yes.
If we consider also the Gulf region is a part of Asia, it's West Asia, I don't think China can have unipolar Asia. It's impossible. So when you talk about Asia, you are talking about East Asia, I think, okay? First, you refuse Indo-Pacific framework by yourself. And second, China, even in East Asia, always support the key role of ASEAN countries. So RCEP is from ASEAN countries. This East Asia summit from ASEAN countries. So I don't think China can achieve and doesn't want to achieve any unipolar Asia. But based on Chinese understanding, India wants a unipolar Asia, but want to have I want a multipolar Asia, but unipolar South Asia. I think that's the idea.
I think I should give a minute to Janardhan to be consistent with the other panelists. So if you want to make a comment, and then we move to Martin Willem.
No, I think I like that formulation, right? I mean, I think the United States wants to remain a unipolar world with a multipolar Asia. China wants to have a unipolar Asia, but is open to the idea of a bipolar or multipolar Asia. But India wants a multipolar Asia and a multipolar world.
I have to say that, but before I move to Martin, that as a European, I feel very bad that we don't even put Europe in the picture. We didn't even mention Europe so far, apart from me saying I'm a European. This is something we should reflect heavily with my European colleague in the room, but this is not the time to cry. Martin Willem.
Thank you.
Where is Martin?
Over here. Thank you. My question is, in a nutshell, what is the strategic importance, strategic role of philosophy? We hear, the West misreads India, the West misreads China, maybe everybody misreads the Middle East. It used to be that philosophers in Greece, in the Islamic world, in China, used to be in the middle of the real world of politics, of business, etc. Now, at least in the West, philosophers tend to be in sort of academic silos, and we don't appreciate the role of differences in ways of thinking as much maybe as we used to. So if you think about the education of the next generation of diplomats, of political leaders, even business leaders, what do you think in this world we are moving into should be the strategic role of philosophy?
You are elevating our conversation to philosophy, which is always good. I will take a couple of other questions, at least another one, and then we get back to our panel. Cinzia Bianco.
Hello, and I was sort of called upon by Dr. Magri when he referred to Europe on your right side. Hi. So first of all, thank you very much. It was a very interesting panel and very well moderated, I have to say, because we got a lot from the different perspectives. But I wanted to make a quick sort of provocative question to all of the speakers. I think we all agree that we're going somewhere beyond a unipolar world. We're going towards a multipolar world. That's true. I do believe that the difference between a multipolar world and a chaotic, fragmented, anarchic world is in partnerships. So I think we might have to consider the idea that this is a transition phase where we would sort of be building different partnerships, and then in a couple of years we'll be on the other side of this transition phase with new partnerships, and at that point we might be have more clarity on the poles. And I would argue that Europe is going to make a difference in its own way in terms of the still strong economic weight that carries when it aligns with one partner or the other. And just a quick example, after losing ground to China for 2 years, Europe is again the most important, the European Union, trade and investment partner for the GCC region.
Your
the
question?
GCC, yeah.
Sorry, Cinzia, your question.
Just a reaction from the panel on this idea that there is significance in the economic weight of Europe, and the de-risking from China can play a difference into the new architecture of multipolar world. Thank you.
Thank you, Cinzia. So I don't have any other requests. So I turn to the panel, and starting from James, I would like you to answer to either both or one of the questions briefly.
Very briefly on philosophy, I mean, I tend to think that there are narratives in both India and China about there being sort of indigenous approaches to international affairs, from Kautilya to Sun Tzu. I tend to think most countries respond the same way, and that's why I feel like, you know, India is responding to its set of challenges in a way that is quite typical for a rising great power. I mean, it has its own sort of complexity and its own situation, but I'm not sure that sort of theories that are particular to each country are all that helpful. I think most countries behave the same way in the international system. On Europe, I tend to think, I mean, I think you're right that Europe has some reflections to do as to why it doesn't get taken seriously in these debates, and that's in part because Europe, as Europe, doesn't invest enough in being a security contributor in the Indo-Pacific region. But I also think, you know, watch what India does, not what India says with respect to Europe. So Mr. Jayashankar and others in the Indian system, you know, they love poking Europe in the eye. I mean, it's a sport. Europe is hypocritical. Europe has double standards. You know, Europe wants one thing in Ukraine and another thing everywhere else. But, you know, Mr. Modi has been to Denmark, he's been to Slovenia. There's almost no European country small enough that India's Prime Minister won't turn up at some point. And that does tell you something, which is that as India looks at where it is going to seek new partnerships, it has the United States, it has the Quad countries, but Europe is also important. These countries give India something that it finds to be useful, maybe slightly less on the security front, but meaningful economic markets and some support in the international system. And so I think Europe is important for India, and you can see that in the way that India behaves, even if sometimes India gets annoyed by the language that Europeans use.
Who?
I think, you know, I mean, for China, our saying is that you shouldn't impose on the others what you yourself don't like, you know. So it means we want to have a Chinese modernization. I think for the developing countries, you know, modernization is a common value, but every country has to find out your own way. So I think there could be Indian way of modernization, you know, Saudi way of modernization. So I think that's a value, and we support. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Janardhan, and then Samir.
Yeah, I think Samir will talk about the philosophy of Indian, strategic affairs. But I think, it's not rocket science really to understand what the philosophy of strategic affairs is. I mean, deal with others as you would have others deal with you. I think that's really important, with respect, which I think is not happening really. Stop believing that one knows everything and the other doesn't know anything. Stop lecturing them what to do. Because I think we must understand that nothing is black and white. There's plenty of gray out there, and I think we must learn to start recognizing the gray areas and stop believing that all things modern are Western. We are beginning to see this process of Easternization and Asianization, and I think there's plenty of modernity involved out there, and we must recognize that. And that ties up with the other question on Europe, basically. I think there's a lot that Europe can really learn in terms of how the Gulf Asia template has worked out very well over the last 20 years. There's been mutual respect. There's been more of interest, less of values. And as I said before, as long as Europe's economies were doing well, you could emphasize the values bit a great deal, but now you must begin to recognize that you have to have a balance between values and interests, and take a look at some of those templates that have worked very well for Gulf-Asia relations, because that's also the template that will work in the future with Gulf-Africa. So until and unless Europe pulls up its socks, it's going to lose out moving forward, because there's a lot of mini-lateral partnerships that are taking place between the Asian countries and the Middle Eastern and the Gulf countries. And we're beginning to see a bit of Europe come into it, but it's completely Europe's game to lose if they don't pick up the pieces and smell the coffee.
Thank you. And now Samir.
The world will be a better place if there is a stronger Europe. Stronger economic actor, stronger political actor. James is right. Indian Prime Minister and the Indian Foreign Minister, certainly in the last 5 years, have made more investments, political investments in Europe than ever before in our past. Ever before. and by a factor of X. It's huge what we are doing with the Green Strategic Partnership with Denmark, the presence in GlobeSec. We are wooing Central Eastern Europe. We are not limiting ourselves to Berlin, London, and Paris. Europe as a whole is important for India, and we are investing in India. We want more of Europe. Two of my dearest friends are sitting here, Simeon and Paolo, representing two countries that must redefine our relationship with Europe, Greece and Italy. I think for too long, Western Europe and Northern Europe have spoken for Europe with Asia. It's time that the Mediterranean rises and integrates itself with the Arabian Sea. You will have West Asia, India, and Europe as a terrific trilateral arrangement that will offer a path of rational thinking, of sensible economics that is not either overrun by the perversions of China or by the obsessions of America. And I think these three have to work together, so I'm glad you are there as the moderator, because we need you, Paolo. So that's on Europe. Now, on the question of philosophy, I think it always exists. Perhaps you may want to ask that what has truly happened in the recent past is that Western theological or Western theology that defined Western politics and enlightenment and thereafter modernity and globalization has been joined by Eastern voices that are now beginning to reflect back on their own traditional experiences and espousing and putting forth frameworks that are more organic to their societies. So the discomfort today is not that there is no philosophy. The discomfort the world is having is it's no longer Western philosophy that is defining the world. There are others who are beginning to share their own experiences of thousands of years. And you know, the one thing that China and India share besides the border and besides the fact that both of them don't agree on whether it's a border at all, but it's also the fact that both of us, it's not we are rising. Listen, we had risen long before many countries were born in this part of the world, you know, in the Western part of the world that today defines political systems. It is just that courtesy new economic muscles, courtesy new technology platforms, courtesy integration of our vast communities with the world, you are beginning to hear more of us. That makes some of us uncomfortable. That makes some of us want to push back against the veracity or the authenticity of many of the proposals that come out of this part of the world. I think it's a collision of multiple philosophies that is happening, and people are choosing tactics and strategic choices rather than the principles as the basis of foreign policy. That is the problem today. I think politics was always moved by, was moved around philosophy and social sciences, and it's always going to be defined by that. I don't think that's going to change. There is going to be a collision of different viewpoints, of different philosophical schools, many more than in the past. The period of colonization muted a lot of voices. Schools of traditions disappeared because there was an overwhelming presence of one particular worldview at that particular moment for a few hundred years. That is changing. So I think it's a golden age for political thinking, and with all the disorder, think tanks are in business. We have lots to write about and to think about. So I think it's a good period.
We are ending on time, and we are ending on philosophy. So this is great. Thank you very much to my panelists. Thank you for your attention.